Today I'm going to talk about how Bitcoin was a scam or a global scam that was started due to 2008. So, in 2008, if you haven't done your studies, if you haven't been through it, right, the United States was about to collapse and it was about to bring down the entire world, right? Every country in the world was going to suffer. If you lived through the times, you know that the stores were closing, they were having like liquidation sales, 70, 80% off, 90% off. And people, if you were working, right, especially the older folks, they were like telling you, why aren't you dead yet? Why aren't you retired yet, right? Because it was getting to a point where people were fighting for jobs, right? Because the economy was just that bad, and saying, hey, you're older, right? Let the younger people live, and you just kind of leave, okay? Because we have mortgages, we have stuff. So there, even though I was in Canada, right, I've heard a lot of stories like that, and people were just hating on each other. It was really bad times, and of course, people were going homeless in the U.S. and losing their homes and everything. But anyways, so the economy was bad in a nutshell. And what happened then was that the global economy, right, I guess every country in the world had to save the United States. So they printed a huge amount of money, well, along with the U.S., and they expand the credit, right, by lowering interest rate, making it easier for people to borrow. And they've been doing that for years. So, you know, what I mean by money expansion is basically inflation, right? Inflation is not the rising prices. And inflation is when they start expanding the money supply and the credit. And that means printing the money. And nowadays, they don't print the money. This picture here with these $1 notes, this is what they used to do, right? Nowadays, they don't print any money. They just go onto the computer, and then they add, you know, a zero, maybe 2 zeros, maybe 3 zeros to their bank account. I mean, wouldn't that be great, right? If I could log into my bank account and then say, hey, you know, I have like $1 in my bank account. Maybe I should add like 6 zeros to that and then use that money to buy myself a house, right? Or a PlayStation 5 or something. I don't know. But, you know, that's what they did. And at the same time, they lower interest rate to near zero, right? So that the economy would kick in or start up, or just basically people would start borrowing again. And that's what they did for many years. That's when Bitcoin prices started rising, right? In the beginning, it was slow. But as time went on, it started skyrocketing. And that's because they printed a huge amount of money. And at the same time, that allowed them to keep this inflation indicator at 2% or less. I mean, how could you print so much money globally, right, around the world, right, and your inflation is at 2%? It didn't rise. It didn't go down. Well, actually, it went down. Look at this. 2010, look at this, under 1%, right? So this inflation thing, these changes, right, it was only until 2020 that the inflation went up to 6%. And why that happened is because they have been suppressing everything. They have been printing so much money. They doubled down on it, or like, you know, even more than double down on it after they had the second crisis, because we never exited the 2008 crisis. It's just that they were dragging this thing on. And who it helped is home, right? Home prices started skyrocketing. And then as time went on, Bitcoin prices started skyrocketing because they already filled up the home prices. The home prices were already really high. So the money had to go somewhere else. And then it went into home prices. I mean, into Bitcoin prices. Now, also, it went into countries like India, into China. And the reason for that is because India and China are the countries that produce things, right? If you flip over the back of wherever your stuff was, like your mouse, your keyboard, your phone, or whatever, it's either made in India or China. And so they created so much inflation since 2008. They sent it over to China. They sent it over to India. And like, they sent the money, right? And then China and India sent us the dishwasher. They sent us the air conditioner, refrigerator, stove, oven, I don't know. Basically, they sent us everything we use in our daily lives. That's why you see, like, India and China rising, and then the people there is able to come to the West to study, right? And buy big houses and things like that, because they created the inflation and sent it over there, right? So they were able to collect more of the currency and then come back and bring it back to the country, right? Into like the United States or Canada or Australia to buy up the stuff. So as it's not their fault that they are able to collect the currency. It is actually the countries printing the money's fault for causing that to happen and sending it over there. Anyway, so now it's 2024, right? As the prices of real estate rose, the prices of Bitcoin rose, and the prices of everything else rising. It's funny because they're talking about using Bitcoin to power the U.S., right, as a strategic reserve. It's not a reserve. It's a scam because Bitcoin was created in the U.S., right? And they're trying to keep the United States reserve status by using Bitcoin. But it was all a scam in the beginning because they created Bitcoin. I'm pretty sure they created Bitcoin because the Bitcoin came out right after they started printing money, right? So they created Bitcoin, and I remember back then I couldn't buy it because I was in Canada. I mean, it was a really sketchy way, and there was no way, even though it's a technology, it was like an internet stuff, you couldn't buy it in Canada. Okay, it was extremely difficult, and you had to go through Second Life and all that stuff. So I never got any because I couldn't buy it in Canada. So if you weren't in the U.S., right, it was very difficult for you to buy it if you had no connections or anything. And even if you were in the U.S., you had to go through all these games, and it was very strange because I tried to get my friend to buy it, and he wouldn't buy it. So anyways, so they created this entire problem, right, the U.S., from 2008. They expanded all the currency supply, right, asking every country to save the United States, or actually every country felt like they needed to save it because, the U.S. was collapsing. And back then, it's very interesting, too. $1 United States dollars, I could get I think I got that wrong. What I was talking about is if I had $1 US dollar, right, it's not supposed to be $1 US dollar. So it's like if I had $1 Canadian dollar back then, I would be able to get $1.25 in US dollars. Times were good, right? Because if I had $1 Canadian dollar, my Canadian dollar was stronger. So is New Zealand and the U.S., Australia. I don't even know why Australia's flag isn't in here, but I follow Australia a lot. But anyways, nowadays it's different. If I had $1 US dollar, I would be able to get $1.25 Canadian, which means I basically lost 25 cents, right? And since the U.S. is a much larger country compared to Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and other things, right? We are actually suffering, right? So, anyways, times were good back then, but now it's not so good. But anyways, we had to devalue our currency along with the U.S., right? Because if they devalued it too much, then our currency becomes too powerful. And what happens then, right, is that the U.S. won't trade with us, or the business people won't trade it with us because our Canadian dollar would be too high. So every country had to devalue it, just as the U.S., right, by printing money and expanding the credit and things like that, lowering interest rate, causing prices of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency to rise. But funny enough, right, since 2008, like I was saying, the inflation didn't change, right? Like how can that be, right? If you printed amount of money in 2020 and this went up to 6%, how can you print something in 2008 and it didn't go anywhere, right? How does that even make sense? It doesn't. So it caused the real estate prices to rise, right, in Canada, UK, Australia, and other places. And it's the main cause of all the problems we're experiencing today. And the funny thing is that they're planning to use Bitcoin, right, which is a problem they cause, right, to power their US dollar again. I mean, the entire thing is a scam for the US because it's not helping other countries. is not helping other countries at all, in fact. Because our real estate prices would not be that high, and our standard of living wouldn't be that low if that didn't happen. But it happened.